Good evening, and welcome to the housewife's favorite, Having a Drink with Mink. Due to a binding court order, I am your host, Jason Mink. It's swell to be back again. Thanks for all the great comments on the last video. It's wonderful to hear from you, and your responses help this little channel grow. Let's get right to it. But first, I hope you have a nice beverage on hand. I know that I do. Let's begin. Born in 1970, I witnessed the dawn of the blockbuster. I was lucky enough to experience firsthand movies like Jaws, Star Wars, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, silver screen sensations that re-leveled the playing field, leaving irrevocable impact craters on popular culture. By the 1980s, studios were casting about for their next potential cash cow, and the smart money seemed to be on a little book called Dune. Written by Frank Herbert in August of 1965, the novel, and its first few sequels, are considered sci-fi classics. Set largely on the desert planet of Arrakis, the main story concerns warring clans of humanoids battling for power and control of the spice, a strange drug with remarkable abilities. Filmmakers had been eyeing the detail-rich book for decades, with controversial creator Alejandro Jodorowsky coming the closest to realizing the project. Jodorowsky sought out like minds for what he envisioned to be a cinematic experience like no other, drafting artists like H.R. Giger and Moebius to bring the novel's concepts to startling life. Sadly, it was not meant to be. However, the ball was still in play, handed off to another maverick filmmaker by the name of David Lynch. All the signs pointed to Dune being another smash hit. After all, it featured a stellar cast, a visionary director, and, for the time, cutting-edge special effects. Heck, Brian Eno even contributed some music. For all that, Dune proved to be a bomb at the box office, not even recouping its budget. The reasons are many and complex, but unanticipated, as the film had a slew of licensors eager for a cut of the merchandising dollar. There was a lunchbox, trading cards, coloring books, and even a Marvel comic. For all that, none of these products flopped harder than the toys. Released by Galoob in 1984, the Dune action figures hit pegs with a deafening thud. The film was simply too adult for kids, the primary market for such playthings. Not only that, the toys themselves were oddly proportioned, sporting boring earth tone colors and uninspiring, if not downright gross, costumes. Hell, the line's most exciting vehicle was a worm. It doesn't take a genius to see why kids stuck with G.I. Joe that year. For all that, the line does make a fascinating case study in what not to do, so let's take a closer look. Right out of the gate, and it's the film's protagonist, Paul Atreides. Decades before Kyle MacLachlan's career-defining role as the mayor on Portlandia, he played this guy. Galoob chose to produce him in his military gear, an odd choice since he wore a different outfit for most of the film. He moves at the neck, shoulders, and hips, because who needs elbows and knees, right? The figure also lacks any trace of musculature, built more like a crash test dummy than a virile hero. Combine that with the pine green uniform and his drawn, almost sullen face, and you have one uninspiring toy. But let's not forget his accessories, which appear to be a nail gun, a pool snorkel, and one of those things that you wave a plane in with. But wait, there's less. Stilgar the Fremen is one of the line's good guys, although that's a pretty relative term here. He's another doughy wad of plastic, only this time in an eye-catching dung brown. And if you thought this guy was Kenny Loggins, well, kick off your Sunday shoes and dance into the danger zone, because you're alright. And making stupid Kenny Loggins jokes is really the most fun that you're going to have here. He moves at the same 5 points as his buddy Paul with a battle-matic action feature that allows him to throw his grappling hook. Although it's wedged so tightly in his hand, it's more a melee weapon than climbing tool. Man, I bet that was smart. Next up, the Sardaukar warrior. What should our elite military force look like? I don't know. How about we wrap them up in black garbage bags and stick broken MacBooks to their faces? I'm kidding, of course. MacBooks didn't exist in 1984. That said, there's still no excuse for this. Yes, black is a good starting point, but even all the black can't make a guy in a beekeeper suit intimidating. But look, his arm goes up and down. Yeah, so does mine, but I don't call it drink-o-matic action. Although perhaps I should. Now let's take a look at some of the film's heavies. So to speak. Baron Harkonnen is a bloated, pustulant sex pest. You know the type. With a propensity for corruption and a physique that makes Herbie Popnecker look downright hench, he floats around the movie on high-tech suspensors, being manipulative and generally making a pervy nuisance of himself before being snapped up like a Swedish meatball by a sandworm. Why, that sounds like a recipe for action figure success to me. I'm guessing at least a few children, unlucky enough to receive this toy, took it outside and treated it like it was a wiffle ball. I mean, what the hell else are you gonna do with it? Next up is Raban, another in the film's line of increasingly unsavory characters. I'll be honest, I don't really remember a lot about this guy. He's essentially the Jan Brady of the Clan Harkonnen, stuck between more crowd-pleasing siblings. Comes with a gas mask, so he's got that going for him. Not much else, to be honest. All of these figures have janky postures due to questionable sculpting choices and lack of knees. Oh sure, knees don't seem like much, but take them away, and where does that get you? Other than about 3 inches closer to the ground. Rock musicians trying to become movie stars is nothing new. Bowie, Jagger, and even Bob Dylan all took a shot at the big screen, so why not Sting? In the 1980s, he was already ubiquitous, so why not more of them? As Fayed Harkonnen, the singer paraded around in his underpants, chewing the scenery harder than a horn-tailed wasp. But, in all fairness, I reckon that's what he was there for. After all, our heroes were pasty, enervating bores. As such, and because of the singer's notoriety, this figure did a little better than his counterparts, avoiding the indignity of hanging on the clearance pegs with his brothers for the next decade. While his costume looks like something borrowed from a 1970s-era Doctor Who episode, it still translates nicely to toy form. He comes with a crysknife for stabbing and a handy milking cat for drinking. Think of it like a juice box, only harder to get the straw in. There is one more notable character we need to mention, and that is the sandworm. While they commonly grow up to 450 meters long, this one is a little smaller. In the film, they were used as mounts by the Fremen, although considering the scale of the other figures in the line, I don't think anyone is getting very far. Now, I get it. Worms look like what they look like, but having this on my desk at work drew more than a few startled glances. From top to bottom, this was one of the more unsavory licenses, and the industry learned from Dune that not every movie needed its own toy line. Alright, let's move on to a topic near and dear to my heart. This was suggested to us by viewer 1701 Patrick, and he requested we talk about some Atlas comics. Done and done. Atlas, also known as Atlas Seaboard, was a short-lived company headed by Martin Goodman, former owner and publisher of Marvel Comics. Goodman took issue with how Marvel was handled after he sold the company and decided to show his former employees how to do it right. He lured top comics creators away from the big two with promises of larger paychecks and ownership rights of their concepts, but due to mismanagement and other factors, the company went under in less than 2 years. If you want to take a deeper dive into the subject of Atlas Comics, check out our video in the links below. Many of the Atlas titles were clearly inspired, not only by other comic characters, but popular films and cultural trends as well. However, it was the company's more original concepts that seemed like they had the best chance on the market. Tiger Man is secretly Dr. Lancaster Hill, a scientist faffing about with tiger chromosomes during his 2-year internship in the bush. All this faffing does not go unnoticed, and he sent a fur-covered murdergram in the night. But Thanks to a previous injection of said chromosomes, he now has a savage nature and the primal strength needed to slay the beast. He's given a costume made out of its hide by locals only too eager to see him leave, and our adventure begins in earnest. Now established at a big city hospital, Hill learns his nurse sister has been murdered by 2 rodeo cowboys. That's right, they seem cute at first, but you keep them around long enough and soon they'll be smoking and generally degrading the verisimilitude. Remarkably enough, one of these clowns is the spitting image of Norm Macdonald as Burt Reynolds. Make of that what you will. Unlike a character like Spider-Man or Batman, who would more or less subdue you and leave you for the law to sort out, Tiger Man has more paws on, and he takes these 2 out like trash on a Tuesday night. It's rare to see a Bronze Age character act with such brutality, but the mayhem was only just beginning. Planet of the Vampires. Sounds like a winner right out of the gate, right? I thought so, but I remember being severely disappointed on my first read-through. It's not that the book is bad. It has a solid script by Larry Hama and some top-notch Pat Broderick interiors, with no less than Neil Adams inking him on the cover. It was only after rereading this issue for this episode that I realized my problem with it. It's Planet of the Vampires, not Planet of the Draculas. Let me explain. Astronauts return to Earth only to find the apocalypse has occurred in their absence. All that remains of civilization is a high-tech city sealed inside a vast dome. Within, the inhabitants have a perfect society, or so it seems. Turns out they're vampires, or they just really want to drink blood. Either way, things go from bad to worse for the astronauts, with our heroes escaping the forces of the dome, only to stumble into a waiting horde of barbarians. So science-based vampires with no supernatural powers or formal evening wear to liven up the proceedings may have been the comic's biggest failing. Promising readers a whole planet full of vampires and then just giving them these chuckleheads is too much of a tease, at least for monster kids like me. John Target, Man Stalker, is often minimized, if not skipped over, entirely when talking about Atlas Comics. But hey, I reckon that's what this channel is for. CIA agent John Target's wife and daughter are caught up in the crossfire of a mob war. In the midst of his musings, a mountain is brought down on Target's head, but this simply provides our hero a moment to lay back, relax, and get the reader up to speed before the carnage occurs. Taking a train ride home to Chicago, Target encounters 2 old-school gangsters there to rub him out. And while their attempts at intimidation might work with you or me, Target is a different breed of hero. Specifically, one willing to blow fist-sized holes in anyone who crosses him. The gangsters learn this the hard way, punching one-way tickets to Slab City. After being decommissioned by his boss for his wanton violence, Target's badge and hand cannons are confiscated, and he's turned out into the street. Luckily, he knows a guy, but when he goes to purchase some unlicensed firearms, he gets a big shock. He wasn't in fact fired from the CIA, but instead made an even secreter agent, one that the company can use for their dirty work without being fingered if things go sideways. This is Jake with Target, as he's itching for more bloodshed. Soon enough, some mobsters think they have him cornered. After all, he wouldn't open fire in a crowded store, right? They're wrong, and for the last time, as Target and artist Howard Nostrin unload one of the wildest sequences in Atlas history. Using his new machine gun, our G-Man swings around the corner and sprays lead death at the hapless criminals. As smirking, lifeless mannequins look on, gangsters spin and pirouette with a grace never known in their lives, a party of bullets going on beneath their shirts. It's a truly inspired set of panels, channeling the ironic violence at play in old EC crime books, as well as then-current anti-hero Dirty Harry Callahan. And now that the reader is all caught up, we return to where we began, only instead of finding a corpse, the mountaintop bomber only finds death. And look, Johnny is sporting a costume now, apparently an editorial decision to make the character more of a superhero type. And while some may feel this is where the book loses focus, for me, it's all part of the saga. After all, I discovered this comic with issue 3, so as far as I knew, he was always running around with a big target on his chest. Remember those old ads in the back of comics? They said stuff like, learn how to fix radios at home in your spare time, or become a harvester of eyes. Good pay, great benefits. Well, if you've ever wondered about the latter, Demon Hunter #1 by David Anthony Kraft and Rich Buckler can show you a thing or two. Telepath Gideon Cross is mixed up in some wild stuff. As a member of the Harvesters of Night cult, he acts as a contract killer, taking blood from his victims in addition to cash payment. And while it seems like a cush job for an ex-soldier like himself, he discovers things aren't quite as cut and dried as he'd been led to believe. While making his latest blood drop, Cross encounters a demon who seems like a threat at first, but is quickly taken down, giving the hunter information he needs to solve his employer's sudden murder. Things only get thornier from there, with hooded cultists, sacrificial slayings, and tortured souls trapped in the gulf between worlds, all things that would cause a parent or guardian to at least look sideways at your reading choices. But Atlas Comics seem to be about pushing that envelope, with characters who went further than their contemporaries over at the Big Two. Its demons are nasty, and our hero is no ray of sunshine himself. And while this book only ran for a single issue, the character reappeared not once but twice, first as Bloodwing in 1980, and then as Devil Slayer over in a Marvel comic or two. Sometimes it's good to be bad. One of the oddest Atlas concepts was Morlock, a sentient plant-human hybrid with a taste for blood. Lots of Atlas characters were drinking it, like Son of Dracula, but at least he did it with panache. Morlock here, well, just see for yourself. It's the dystopian future, and science has once again trifled in domains best left undisturbed, with this old geezer growing some truly killer buds. His horticultural exploits are curtailed by the arrival of the narcs, who bust up the scene and generally ruin the overall vibe. They confiscate his crop and stick it in a lab somewhere, where this plant begins to flower. Yeah, sure, that's what this is. Hard to believe the Comics Code approved this. Maybe Martin slipped someone a couple of bucks to look the other way. I bet you wish you had. At any rate, Morlock, that's his name now, here is immediately indoctrinated into this 1984-esque world, given treatments to break his will and subjugate his mind. However, even plants have defenses, as this poor slob finds out. He's quickly subsumed by a rapidly spreading green that overtakes his body, leaving him human topiary. Now aware of this startling power, the government uses Mori as an assassin, taking dangerous poets out in the street. Seems extreme, but I've heard the guy's work. It's no big loss. And like all young plant-human hybrids in the bloom of youth, Morlock begins to notice the opposite sex, and quickly makes a girlfriend. Just as quickly, things go south, leading to this wholly unforeseen change. Now an ambulatory 8-armed lawn cigar, our title character proceeds to chug Sally here like a pony bottle of Miller Lite. Her fate sealed, he's driven off by security, and Morlock escapes to future issues. But don't worry, if you like this issue, there are 2 more just as off the wall. Speaking of, ever wondered how things would have gone if Spider-Man were a jerk? Well, wonder no more, as the Destructor is here. Our soon-to-be hero begins the story as a petty thug, making his way up the criminal ladder. From our initial impression, there's very little redeeming about J. Hunter. He even smokes. Dr. Hunter has created a super soldier-type serum. All he needs is a guinea pig. Why not his ne'er-do-well son? Why, it might give him a chance to make something of himself. Yeah, namely a super-powered thug. You didn't think this one through, Doc. And he never gets a chance to reconsider as a gangster. Man, there are a lot of gangsters in the Atlas universe. Bursts in, gunning them both down. To save his life, Jay is given the mysterious serum by his dying father and wakes up to the crime's aftermath. Consumed with guilt, he goes on a rampage, smashing up the lab and discovering his father's serum actually worked, not only saving his miserable life, but giving him increased strength, speed, and heightened senses to boot. Inadvertently discovering the suit his father left for him, he becomes the Destructor, presumably because all the good names have already been taken. It sounds like something a 5-year-old would have come up with, but I reckon that's part of its charm. Destructor tracks down the criminals responsible for Pop's murder and then mops the floor with them. Necessary catharsis after the trauma he's endured. And for being a relatively unskilled combatant, he does alright for himself. At least until getting winged by a slug. After that, he's forced to use his heightened senses to get the drop on the final criminal, defeating his foe, and making the cut for another 3 issues, making the Destructor one of the longest-lived Atlas Seaboard characters. Ironic, no? But that's not all. Heck, it's not even a quarter of the books that Atlas had to offer. There were iron-jawed barbarians, hot-dog-loving New York City cops, and grim ghosts in the employ of Satan himself. Maybe I should have talked about those, huh? I'll tell you what, if you enjoyed this Atlas special and want more, let me know in the comments section below. I'd be happy to revisit the subject, because there's still so much more to talk about. That said, we're done for today, so thanks for tuning in. I'm Jason Mink, and you can bet that I'll see you next time. Cheers.